Hi, and welcome to Never Too Early. I share stories as a preemie parent for anyone who needs to or wants to hear them. In the last episode, I shared how I gave a birth at 23 weeks and 6 days unexpectedly in a hospital bathroom, and how we were transferred to the university hospital soon after. If you haven't watched that two-part episode yet, you can start there so that we are on the same page. You can find a link here or in the description box. In this episode, I want to talk about what happened next, the first few days in the NICU after the initial shock. After a very sudden and unexpected birth at around 6:30 in the morning in one hospital, my baby was transferred to the university hospital alone, accompanied by a doctor and a fire truck. A couple of hours later, my husband and I arrived at the university hospital. It was at around noon. At first, I was placed in a shared room with another mother who was with her full term baby. Shortly after, the head nurse noticed how difficult the situation could be for me, and she moved me to a single room. So after settling into the single room a little bit, I texted the friends that I invited over for dinner that evening, and then gave them a short update. And I also texted my pastor. Then my husband and I were ready to go visit my baby at the NICU. The NICU had many rooms of different sizes. The room we were in could hold about 5 or 6 incubators, but most of the time there are about 2 or 3. And when we walked in, the nurses welcomed us in very warmly. The hospitals were still following the COVID rule, so everyone was wearing masks, including ourselves. And even with faces half covered, the eye contacts were really warm and reassuring. I really could feel that we were in good hands. When I was led to my baby's incubator, it was covered with this very specific cover made for incubators to recreate the dark and womb like environment inside. And my baby, when we lifted the cover up, my baby was there, incredibly tiny and purple and super hairy, and his face was covered with the tapes holding the tubes in place. And his body, there were so many cables attached. So I really couldn't see the whole baby. Like he was there, but he was covered with so many things and it was so small. Also, he had this tube installed into his nostril because his lungs weren't mature enough, so he needed this oxygen support. And he had this huge cut under the nose because the delivery process was very unusual. And along the way, he had this injury and he had this huge cut under the nose. And my heart sank um, looking at it. It just looked incredibly painful on such tiny body. And that's also kind of when the mom guilt started creeping in. I couldn't stop thinking like, what if I I had known better? Well, could I have prevented this? It was almost like this replay button for the super dramatic birth scene. So it was just so painful to watch. But also at the same time, beyond that, I didn't really know how to feel or how to connect with the baby. Our first meet and greet wasn't really quite usual anyway, and I was still really numb in shock, so I wasn't really ready to feel, and I felt a little bit detached from the whole situation. unable to process what just happened and what is happening. So I spent my time mostly in the single room that I was assigned to, or next to my baby's incubator and the NICU. And people would come in and out all day long. The doctors, nurses, researchers, and others who are in charge of various admin processes, introducing themselves, asking long series of questions, drawing blood from me and the baby, giving medications, explaining the procedures, and handing me stacks of documents to read and sign, and etc. etc. It really felt like these masked faces were shuffling in and out all day long, but there was very little space for me to kind of orient myself. On top of that, everything was happening in German language, which I was not yet fluent in. Thankfully, most doctors and younger nurses can speak really good English, so that was really helpful. But in other conversations, I had to really try to follow what's happening in German, and it made this entire overwhelming situation even more overwhelming than it already is to me. And there was very little room left for me to sort of sit and take things in. But my extreme premature baby is there out in the world, and I had to keep functioning. That afternoon, my husband brought a few things from home, like, a couple of books and my underwear, socks, some basic clothing, etc. And then he had to leave the hospital in the evening because of the COVID restriction. He was not allowed to stay. And that evening, a nurse offered me dinner, but I really couldn't eat, so I refused. And that night, alone in the dark in the single room, I finally had this moment of stillness, and that's when everything caught up with me. And I started crying, and I started frantically searching online for survival rates for the babies who were born at 23 weeks, hoping to maybe find some sort of hopeful numbers or evidence that are reassuring. And then soon I realized that all these like medical stats were really not super reassuring. So I started looking for some vlogs or videos or anything that is by made by parents. I found some hopeful stories, but I also found many memorials. Well, now I fully understand why those parents had to publish those stories. It really is a part of how they heal and process. But back then, they really, really devastated me. When you're in a dark place, the only thing you're looking for is light. So that was kind of the early seed of why I wanted one day start this channel, Never Too Early. And later that night, a nurse came in and rolled in this breast milk pumping machine, talking to me that I have to pump. And I was like, I remember thinking like, what is she talking about? I'm so in shock and I can't process anything. Why is she bringing this strange machine and adding more to my plate? It was so confusing. And I did have an impression that in the NICU, nurses understood nuances and details of mothers with the premature babies, but in the maternity ward, I mean, they're taking care of all mothers in the same rhythm. So they had to do whatever they had to do to and for all mothers. So looking back, I'm very grateful that this nurse insisted and introduced me to this whole breast milk pumping and this machine because otherwise Breastfeeding, starting it later, would have been extremely much more challenging. And I see and deeply appreciate how everyone was doing their work diligently. But in that moment, it just felt too much. Monday morning, I had the hospital breakfast, and for a brief moment, I felt like I was in jail because the meal was just really not the nicest meal. And a bit later, when I visited my baby again in the NICU, I saw the cut under his nose was already closed after a small procedure. It was unbelievable how quickly things moved to care for these tiny babies. And he was also under blue light therapy to help his premature skin to adapt to the outside world. And around noon, my pastor visited to check in and to pray together. He brought flowers and a Korean meal prepared by his wife, but because of the COVID rules, only one visitor was allowed in the room. So his wife could not come in, and my husband had to step outside during the pastor's visit. And that meal was the first proper meal that I had after many months because during my entire short pregnancy, I had extreme nausea, so I couldn't really eat anything properly. The rest of the day stayed really busy. There wasn't much quiet time next to the incubator because, again, there were doctors, nurses, and different members of the medical team would come in and out. That night, I tried breast milk pumping again in quietness. At first, there was nothing, and then there was just a few drops, which I was so excited about. Then by midnight, there was 1 or 2 milliliters. Then from there on, there would be, 1 or 2 or few milliliters every few hours. So it just felt so rewarding. And handing the milk to the nurses so that they can take it to the baby in another floor, it felt like I was finally able to do something for my own baby. On Tuesday, the blue light therapy continued in the incubator, and my milk slowly started to increase to a few milliliters at a time, which made me incredibly happy. And I witnessed the diaper change in the incubator for the first time. And the nurse did it with such gentle care because there's so many cables. Babies are very fragile and very tiny, very premature. And even the micro diaper for premature babies looked huge on the 23 weeker. So I wanted to show you a quick comparison. This is the smallest diaper for newborns, and this right next to it is the diaper for the preemies. And he had lost some fluid by then, meaning babies usually dry up a little bit after birth. So he weighed even less at around 550 grams. There were still many papers and interviews and blood draws and medications and instructions, etc., going on all while I was still bleeding and trying to figure out this whole breast milk pumping thing all day and all night. Physically, though, I was recovering surprisingly fast. One of the doctors saw me kind of like jumping around doing mom tasks, and she was like, "Oh my God, I've never seen something like this before." Yeah, it did look like I was recovering quite fast. By Wednesday morning, I was trying to find the real uninterrupted time with my baby, but people were still coming in and out constantly, and the pumping schedule, which was every 3 hours, was also in the way. And later that morning, a doctor came in to talk about discharge planning. Even as a German male doctor, I mean, his nature would be usually, super direct and super straight to the point, but like he was try really hard to be indirect and sensitive and kind and everything to deal with the mother with the premature baby, which I'm very grateful for. I know it's really not easy for this German male doctors. Anyway, so yeah, like his point was, they would usually let moms in such extreme situations um, to stay at the hospital as long as they want or they can. But in this case, my recovery is really just through the roof. And we live within the city, so commute is quite easy. And there are actually moms this week that really, really need bed. So it would be nice if I can start commuting if I'm ready, but if I'm not, of course I can stay. That's basically what he said. And I thought about it, I agreed, and I received all the documents. For example, breast pumping machine rental prescription or a doctor's note for work in case I need it. And also, like, I got an ice bag for transporting milk from home, etc. Me and my husband stayed late until that night with the baby, and then I went home for the first time in a few days after leaving home without having any clue that I was going to give a birth. And that's when the 4 month of commuting to the NICU began. When I think about those first days in the NICU, what stands out most is the sense of detachment. I didn't really know how to feel or even what to feel. Everything was so overwhelming, so confusing, and moving so fast. People were coming in and out constantly, wearing masks, speaking German to me, and I was just trying to keep up with what was happening. My baby didn't even have a name yet. And because I wasn't married by then, I was also a single mother on paper. And my baby was being called Little Mister until about a week later, we decided and informed his name to the hospital. And still inside all of that chaos, I could see how well the system was functioning, how coordinated, careful, and dedicated the entire NICU team was. Everyone was deeply engaged, dedicated, and doing work that felt sacred. Those first few days weren't about understanding what was happening, they were about finding ways to exist one moment at a time. Before I close, I want to gently open the space for anyone who feels like sharing. If you've been through something similar and you feel ready or willing to share, I'd love to hear what were your first few days like? And if you are going through those days right now, how are you doing? Sometimes sharing our stories quietly connects us and lets someone else know that they're not alone in the dark. In the next episodes, I'll share what 4 months of commuting to the NICU were like. Thank you for being here. This is Never Too Early.